to the Mark Cox Show. Find everything Mark Cox at 971talk.com/Cox.
There's obstructionist and resistance by the left. They said that they're for a better deal. All we see is same old spiel. So we hope when it comes to basic Hurricane Harvey funding that we can rely upon a bipartisan, or may I say nonpartisan, push.
Kellyanne Conway there talking about the funding that they'll need to get in place here for the hurricane and tropical storm damage in the South. The vice president is down there right now in Rockport, Texas, about to meet with some of the survivors of that storm. We'll have more details on that. Right now we have Congresswoman Ann Wagner in studio with us. She just this morning was part of a roundtable discussion on human trafficking, which I know is an issue you've worked on for quite a number of years now. What was the purpose of the meeting this morning?
Well, we brought together, and I do this just as often as I possibly can, stakeholders in the community and beyond who can play a role in not just helping me formulate legislation, but in the arena of education and awareness and cooperation and elevating the discussion when it comes to human trafficking, sex trafficking. You know, St. Louis, the greater metro area, is sadly a key hub for this kind of a criminal activity, given our interstates, given our sports and convention and entertainment arenas and venues here, our logistical kind of center of the state. So we've done these with law enforcement, with prosecutors, healthcare professionals that are on the front lines, educators, bring all the superintendents and the school districts together to talk about it. And I get good legislative ideas, things like the SAVE Act, the SOAR Act, things in the human trafficking arena that I have been able to tackle. But to me, you know, you can't solve, Mark, all of society's ills through legislation. It's got to be education, awareness, and cooperation. So today we met right across the street here at the Gateway Transportation Center and brought together transportation stakeholders from Amtrak to MoDOT to Greyhound, Uber, Lyft. We had the Metro Transit authorities there, taxi cab. And I also brought in then Sergeant Adam Kavanaugh, who heads up in the St. Louis County Police, the task force on human trafficking, and the executive director of the Covering House, one of our safe homes that I work with and others in our community do, to talk about the situation. Great things happen at these roundtables. Mark, people share best practices, talk about the resources that are available. They talk about not reinventing the wheel. What good ideas can they take from the Truckers Against Trafficking or from the American Bus Association?
And what are those things, Ann? Are those best practices they use to try to spot young women or children who might be in trouble?
Absolutely.
Is that it?
This is a perfect example of see something, say something.
Okay.
And that whether that's employees or whether that's individuals that are riders on our mass transit that's happening. And so I'm encouraging these transportation modes and operators here in the greater metro area to get together to use some of the resources that we have through the Department of Homeland Security and other avenues like the Blue Campaign, where we have posters in the airports, in the restrooms that have information to help victims, helping drivers, whether you're an Uber driver or a taxi cab driver, who you can call when you suspect that maybe something doesn't look right. And also really just with the greater public so they have an awareness, because this scourge, this abhorrent criminal activity that preys on the most vulnerable in our society, especially young women and children, this is hiding in plain sight, Mark. It's in every community, every cul-de-sac, and we have a duty and an obligation to end that scourge.
Well, I appreciate your efforts in that fight, because that's not something that's always visible to the public, right? I mean, you know it's there, but it's just not something that's in the front of your mind at most times.
No, it's not, and I do whatever I can to elevate the education, as I said, and awareness of this issue, because that's how you solve society's ills. It's private sector, it's neighbor, again, helping neighbor, people reaching out, see something, say something. We have to do something to end this scourge and to take care of those in our community that need our help and our assistance, the victims that fall prey to these awful predators out there, especially online, like the Backpage.coms and others that go after these young women and children, and the abuse is just horrific.
Congresswoman Ann Wagner is our guest, and she mentioned this when she came in at the top of the hour, but in case you missed it, she just got back from a trip to Asia and right around the whole Korea problem we've got over there. In fact, you must have been on your way back when the North Korean Kim Jong-un fired that missile across Japan. You visited Japan, correct, and South Korea?
I certainly did. I went with a high-level delegation, 3 United States senators, 2 members of the U.S. House, a bipartisan delegation, and we started out at Pacific Command and then went on to Japan, to South Korea, to the DMZ, and then, which was an amazing journey, went to China also and did something that a congressional delegation has never done before. We traveled up in China to Dandong, which is a trade border between China and North Korea, and were received not too warmly by the Chinese.
Really?
But talked about trade, because remember, we have sanctions that we have put in place,
right,
by the State Department and by Congress that have implored, and by the United Nations most certainly, that have compelled China to cut down on their exports. North Korea receives about 92% of its goods and services from China. So we've cut out coal and iron ore and seafood. I was up there advocating that it's time for China to squeeze North Korea on oil in order to get Kim Jong-un to the table to have the kind of dialogue, de-escalation, denuclearization that needs to happen. So, the aggression continues, I have to say, and it is definitely a hot spot. We talked a lot in the region and with our allies about missile defense. Mm-hmm. And in fact, in the wake of what the provocative move that Kim Jong-un and Pyongyang did by shooting that missile across Japan. Now, remember, he saber-rattled and said he was going to shoot it towards Guam, and the president got out with his fire and fury, and the Kim regime moved away from that, but they shot it northeast over Japan's sovereign country, and we have responded very strongly. And I can say that earlier today, the United States flew 2 B-1B bombers, 4 F-35s over South Korea, in a big show of force against North Korea, including South Korean F-15 fighter jets. This was all done. We also had a missile defense move and test that was done out of Hawaii. And remember also, travel ban on North Korea starts tomorrow, imposed by the United States and with Congress involved. But we have to work with South Korea, Japan, our allies, our other friends in the region. We have to squeeze China to put the pressure on North Korea to bring them to the table, because the region, Mark, has been dealing with this for some 64 years.
Sure.
Okay, and
sure.
We at homeland and with potential nuclear warheads attached to them.
I'm surprised you said you met with the Chinese. I don't know why they don't do more. I don't completely understand that hesitant to do more than they've done. They did. I did think it was a breakthrough when they said to President Kim Jong-un, if the United States starts it, we'll help you. If you fire the first missile, you're on your own. I mean, that was as much as I've ever heard them say in terms of their willingness to back away, because the last thing they want is a war, because all those people are going to flood across the border that you visited, right?
Sure, and no one wants a war on the Korean Peninsula. No one does. And you know what? We have a lot of our own assets there. And when I say assets, I mean not just the businesses and the companies. Most importantly, I met with the soldiers and the airmen that are serving, and in the tens of thousands, and their families, and the civilians and the diplomats that also work in the region. We've got to do what we can to ratchet down this de-escalation, to move North Korea towards denuclearization, and China has to be there. The last time North Korea came to the table was was I think 9 years ago, and that was when China cut off the oil and brought them to the table. So it is time for the Chinese they're doing quite a bit right now, more than we have ever seen in the most recent past. But it's time for them to do more, and we delivered that message.
Yeah, that's good. I don't want to throw you a curve here, but I don't want to ask this since I finally have you in studio, and I have you as a captive audience here. You and I have discussed the DOL issue a lot. I know that it's kind of been put on hold and now becomes effective in January, although most companies have already accepted it, right? Is there anything else that Congress can do about this?
Hey, late breaking news.
Awesome.
I can actually bring. I am pleased to report that the Department of Labor, under our new Secretary Acosta, in working with the administration and with Congress and my office, has put a delay on that January date for another 18 months. I will be moving legislation to put an end to the current Obama rule and regulation that's out there dealing with the Department of Labor's fiduciary a rule, which would have been a trial attorney's boon and would have cut out access and affordable savings opportunities for middle-income Americans everywhere.
Seeking financial advice, I should point out, for retirement accounts.
Right. This isn't a Wall Street issue. This is a Main Street issue. It has to do with those low and middle income investors that would not have that opportunity. So I'm going back. I've got a great piece of legislation. We're going to put this back in the SEC. We're going to make sure that real people have affordable savings and retirement investment plans.
Good. I'm glad to hear it. I'm thrilled because I know some companies had just gone ahead and accepted, well, this is going to happen, so we might as well institute it. I won't name names, but there are several companies in St. Louis that have already done that.
Yep.
So maybe we can still save the day.
I hope so.
Good. And always great to see you.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming down. Congresswoman Ann Wagner, 2nd Congressional District. We'll get to your phone calls, 314-969-9797. We're going to talk a little bit more about this Jason Stockley case and the potential impact it could have on downtown St. Louis as soon as this weekend. And we're talking protests, streets blocked, the entire kit and caboodle. I'll tell you what police think about this and what their concerns are right after this.
This is the Mark Cox Show. Air Comfort